现在订阅同盟会英语，不论找工作、升学或英检，表现更棒。快上
StudioClassroom.com。
现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Buying a car? What are some things you should consider? We'll find out next. All right, welcome to Advanced Studio Classroom. My name is Brandon, and today is May 1st. We're in a new month. Start our lifestyle article today, and we're talking about life hacks. Thank you for joining us. We also have two panelists with us today. First, welcome, Andrea.
Hi, Brandon. Hi, everybody. Great to be here today.
Good to have you here. What is a hack?
A hack is something that makes your life simpler. It's usually a good idea, something you can do and implement in your life, and it should just bring a greater ease to your life.
All about making my life simpler. There's a lot going on out there, Andrea, so we need these tips to help us out, don't
Yes.
we? We also have Connie back with us. Hi, Connie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, good to have you here. And when you think about life hacks, what comes to mind for you?
Just creative ways to, like Andrea said, make my life easier. Kind of like a shortcut, you know, just something makes me more efficient or I have to spend less time thinking about.
Absolutely. And you can apply this, of course, to many areas of life. But today we're talking about buying a car. Maybe you've never bought a car and you're thinking about it. And so we're going to give you some tips about that. Now, our panelists, I'm going to ask them if they've ever bought a car. Andrea, have you bought a car before?
I have, but
All
I
right.
definitely waited till later in life to buy a car. So I bought a car as an adult, as a mom. That's the first time I did. My first cars were always kind of hand-me-downs.
Yes.
Can you say that about cars?
Sure.
My first really cool car was my brother's old car. And then my parents would give me their old car. But I did feel quite...
Yeah.
Very much like an adult
an
when
adult.
I finally, well, together with my husband, we bought a car. Actually, we bought a van together.
Okay, so I'm sure there was a lot that went into that. Yeah, you had to think about different things that you wanted. What was that like?
It's definitely time consuming. My husband did more of the research online, just finding out about different makes and models and which one we wanted to pursue. We went to several dealerships together and test drove different cars, and that kind of we narrowed down our list of what we liked best. And in the end, it actually went very quickly. We found a good deal online, and I thought we're just going to go look at the van and think about it for a few days and really contemplate. But no, 3 hours later, we walked out with a new van.
There
So
you
that
go.
kind of surprised me, just the pace that you kind of have to do when negotiating and making that decision.
Oh, great. Yeah, sometimes it happens that way. Connie, have you bought a car before?
I kind of went to the dealership with my father and we kind of bought one together. I was kind of lucky that he's a mechanical engineer, so he kind of knew what he was looking at. Yeah.
All right. I have not bought a car before, believe it or not. The car I had when I was living in the States was... My parents bought that for me. It was like one of really my first main car, and I used that until I moved to Asia, and then I sold it. So anyway, I don't use a car here in Taipei, and because it's so convenient, I don't really need one. And I'm sure maybe you realize that too. You just moved back here. You were in the U.S. You had a car there. Do you miss your car, Andrea?
There are definitely times where I miss my car. I miss the convenience of having things in my car, so I didn't have to carry everything along.
Right.
Now I have backpacks and bags.
Especially
as I go out
with
for a
kids,
day.
right? It's a different story.
Yeah, I do have 3 kids, so at this point I'm still carrying a lot of their things. So I really enjoyed just driving, having my music on.
Sure.
It was kind of my alone time.
Yes.
Sometimes, unless the kids were going crazy in the back. But yeah, there's something about the open road in your own car which is very appealing. But then it's also very nice not to have a car.
Yeah.
It definitely alleviates a lot of stress and financial burdens. And again, living in a big city, the public transportation is amazing. So we've been enjoying that again.
A lot of times, Connie, what you hear people talking about here in Taipei and some other maybe big cities is the parking situation, right? You have a car, but then you have to figure out where to park. Now, I'm sure it's different for, different people. I've heard some people say it's not that hard, but then others do say, it can be challenging to find a parking spot. And so that's something you have to think about if you're wanting a car in a big city.
Right. And not only like finding a parking spot, but how big is it?
Yeah.
'Cause people will find a parking spot, but it's like just the size of your car. And then that's when you really have to, is it worth
Right. Yeah, that's
parking?
right. You can't really park there, or it makes it really challenging, right? And so there's the cost component, right? There's all of these things to consider. But maybe you've decided it is worth it for you to buy a car, and you want to think about, well, what should I consider? Well, we have some tips today that we're going to walk you through, and I'm sure there are others as well. This is just something to sort of an overview of what you can consider. So if you have your magazine, we invite you to open it up to page 10, and we'll have our first reading for today.
Life hacks. Suggestions for car buying and organizing your closet. Tips for first-time car buyers. Besides a house, buying a car is the biggest outpouring of money most of us will ever encounter. This guide should help make the process less stressful. Set your budget. A good rule of thumb is to keep the purchase at or below 20% of your yearly salary. This number will largely determine whether or not you buy a new or used car. What's important to you? Maybe you want a vehicle with excellent gas mileage for your long commute. Make a must-have and nice-to-have list. What's not important to you? For folks living in warmer climates, all-wheel drive isn't really necessary. A navigation system might be cool, but you'll probably end up just using your phone anyway. These incremental but expensive features can quickly force you out of your budget.
All right, so you're ready to buy a car. What should you consider? All right, well, first of all, you want to think about all of your other bills and so forth, right? You think of maybe you have a house payment, or you have, other bills that you're having to put money towards. So what are your finances? What's your budget, right? So we start off talking about, besides a house, buying a car is the biggest outpouring of money most of us will ever encounter. In other words, Andrea, it's expensive.
It is expensive. Yeah, I mean, when you look at like that next to a house, the car is the biggest outpouring of money. I like that word, outpouring. It's kind of like you're taking your money and you're pouring it into this investment, this vehicle. But if it's something you need, it's a wise investment, but you want to make wise choices to get to that point.
And I think what they're really talking about here is a newer car. Obviously, if it's a bit older, maybe it's not that expensive, or you can find a good deal here and there. I think the range, it's a pretty big range for the type of car that you're wanting to buy. Are you going to buy like a BMW or Mercedes? Of course, that's very expensive versus maybe something else. Versus if the car is, 10 years old or something like that. It really depends on the type of car that you're looking at.
Absolutely. And there's so many different options as well. I like, or are we moving to the next part, setting the budget, Brandon?
Sure, let's do it. Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like this rule of thumb that they give to keep the purchase price at or below 20% of your yearly salary. Now, this is interesting because when my husband and I were researching, we looked at it more as our monthly budget. How much could we budget per month?
Yeah.
I honestly didn't think of the 20% of our yearly salary, but now looking back, I guess it was about that.
Yeah.
So I think this is an interesting way to look at what your budget is.
Yeah, look at the overall thing, right? What do you make per year? And we have a good term here, Connie, rule of thumb. What does that mean?
A rule of thumb is just like a good guideline or thing to keep in mind while you're trying to buy something or do something. Personally, I think 20% is a bit low. Even for a used car, up to like $10,000, $15,000. You know, if you have your first job, maybe you're making $35,000 a year. That's already half. You know. So I don't know. I thought 20 was very conservative.
Yeah, and you think about, sometimes I think about how much a car costs, and I think, oh, wow, that's expensive. And you remember, okay, well, it's monthly payments, right? And so if you have that fits within your budget, I think that's something to consider. But you have to be careful not to overdo it, right? Like, think about, well, what if, God forbid you lose your job or something like that? Can you still kind of afford to pay this? Or how much money do you have saved up that you could put toward that? All of these things are something to consider as well.
Absolutely. For me, when I was in my early 20s, I took a financial course, I guess a financial...
No.
I don't know.
Class,
what do you call it? A course? Financial course.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me.
Use our money. And I remember the leader of that course, one of the things he drilled into us was that when you buy a car, you need to pay for it right out. Don't do monthly payments.
Oh, cash.
And you should only afford the kind of car that you can pay in full immediately.
Right. That's the best way to do it.
It is, but he was saying then you buy that car, but you still save those monthly payments for when you need to replace that car. And I mean, I learned a lot in this class, but this was one thing I did take to heart. So my husband and I did this. We saved enough money, and then when we moved back to the States, we had enough money to pay for our car. But then we took money every month to save when we knew we needed a replacement or a bigger car. So I thought that was a good tip. But again, not everybody can do that. Sometimes you need a car immediately. But I thought it's interesting. I mean, you definitely have options. There's great, a lot of dealerships now don't even charge you interest if you're doing the monthly payment or the leasing option. But if you can think in advance and try to save enough money to pay for most of it, that will definitely alleviate a lot of stress.
Yeah, that's right. You can save for a really nice down payment on it at least, right? To take away some of that, right? So you don't have to pay for so long on it.
Right.
And so that's really a really good point, Andrea. All right, so what is important to you? That's the question. Maybe you want a vehicle with excellent gas mileage, meaning that, it will go further before you have to fill the tank up again, right? You have a long commute, what kind of car do you want? Maybe you have young kids, or maybe this car is more so for, your wife or something. So you want to think, oh, I want it to be very dependable versus, this is just a car maybe I want for the weekends and it doesn't have to be as dependable as, other situations. So what works for you? Make a must-have and a nice-to-have list. And that's going to look different for everyone depending on your situation, right? Okay, so let's look next, Connie, at what's not important to you. What do we learn here?
What's not important? I guess it depends on where you live. Like the article was saying, if you don't live somewhere where there's a lot of snow, maybe an all-wheel drive isn't for you. Or if you're someone who uses your phone a lot for GPS, maybe you don't need a navigation system built into your car that will show you how to drive to places. And just those small things that you can kind of upgrade your car with they add up, so they can become incredibly expensive. So just organizing what you absolutely need and what is just nice to have I think is a good way just to cut the cost.
Yeah, and we learn here about something called all-wheel drive. Okay, so it says for folks living in warmer climates, all-wheel drive isn't really necessary. You use all-wheel drive more in conditions where you have poor road conditions, for example, where it snows a lot or something like that. And most, cars are just two-wheel drive, either front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive. And so, with all-wheel drive, you have the power using both axles, all four wheels. And so, if you're in the snow or something like that, you gain more traction in that situation. But if you live in a climate where snow isn't really an issue, you're not going off-road or something like that, you probably don't really need that much power, okay? And so that's what they're getting at here. And then we talk about, Connie, a navigation system.
A navigation system is just basically a built-in GPS, from what I understand. It's
Right.
just a kind of a screen in your car that will kind of automatically link up to Google Maps, or maybe they have their own internal system. And I think it's nice just because you don't have to stick your phone on the dash or the windshield or something.
That's true.
And the car just it's just very natural for you to glance at the screen, and the car will tell you where to go. But I guess if like it's not as reliable as what you've already been using on your phone and you're familiar with, then
Right.
it's just an extra map that you don't necessarily need.
That's the thing. I've used those built-in GPS systems, Andrea, and they're not always up to date. Maybe there's like a new road put in, or they've changed something, and then this GPS system is not correct. But your phone is usually more up to date.
Ah, that's true. Yes.
And I'm sure maybe there's ways to update those in your car. I don't know. But in any rate, in this situation, I found that the navigation system in the car was a few years old and it hadn't been updated. So they're saying you're used to using your phone, so you'll probably end up using that anyway. So maybe you don't actually need a car with that navigation system. So maybe you can save money and not get that.
Absolutely. And I think this point of having that list before you go car shopping with the must-haves, things that you definitely need and the nice-to-have, that will give you the right mindset to go in. Because once you're at the dealership, the dealer will try to convince you that a lot of these things are must-haves.
Yes.
But if you do that research ahead of time, you can really make an educated choice or give an educated answer of, no, I don't want this. Show me something else.
And it goes back to also setting your budget beforehand, right?
Yes.
Because otherwise you could be all over the place and be convinced, oh, you need this car, but it's way out of your budget. So that, of course, is something you have to kind of set in stone and know how much, you can actually spend on it. All right, Connie, we talk about these incremental but expensive features. Now, a lot of times we use that word incremental. It's something that happens maybe over time in small portions or something like that, or small changes. What do they mean here by these incremental features?
They're just using incremental to describe how more expensive it will become. I guess so. Increment is just increase in size, so you can kind of increase the price by small steps. It just means everything you add just adds a little bit more money until it's incredibly out of your budget.
Okay. All right. And also, I think it could be talking about the features themselves, right? That, you have a car, a certain model, and then you have the next year they come out with another model. And so they make these changes to the features and they keep changing them year after year. And they're adding to it, right? They're making it better, but you don't always need, for example, you get a new iPhone, right? You don't always need the absolute newest one. Maybe the model the year or two before will suffice as well. And so you really have to figure out what works for your budget.
Oh, are you saying that the changes are so small that there's basically no difference?
Right. It's a slight difference, but maybe it's not necessary, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so I think that's something to consider. I mean, technology changes at such a rapid pace. I don't know about you guys, but I don't always need the latest and best. Like, there's so much out there that I can take a couple versions before and be okay in some situations. Right?
Oh, absolutely. For me, we went with the basic model of the vehicle we purchased, but also just because a lot of those features are the things that break.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Like they can break easily. Or, for example, we bought a van and I just wanted the basic model. I didn't want doors that open on their own.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be able to open my own doors because I've heard that a lot of those sliding doors, the power sliding doors, break easily, and then you have to go to the dealership. And having kids, they break things too.
Yeah.
So we tried to just stick with a very basic model. So again, where you are in your life, thinking about some of these features.
Absolutely. There's so many gadgets on some vehicles that it's more things that could go wrong potentially, right? They could break down. And so that's something to think of as well. All right. Next, we're going to talk about fine-tuning your list. You've made your list of, must-haves and nice-to-haves and all that. Let's fine-tune that, right? So we can get down to what we really need. So let's go to our next reading. We're at the top of the right-hand column on page 10.
fine-tune your list. Now that you've set your budget and needs, it's time to narrow down your choices. Aim for a top 3 list, and before you go to a dealership, take the time to learn about the many new features available, especially the non-mechanical ones. While they can add a lot of value, they're not always necessary. Test drive. Drive the car you are thinking about buying. Maybe it has all the features you want, but is incredibly uncomfortable, and the only way to know for sure is to try before you buy.
So you have your budget in place and you kind of know what you want. So it's time to narrow down your choices, right? So you can really figure out the best car for you. And it tells us, Andrea, that we should aim for a top 3 list, and we should do something before we go to a dealership. What is a dealership?
A dealership is a business. It's a place that sells cars. And that's one option when you're buying a car. It's also a great option just to go and check out the model and the make and things like that. So it's the business that sells cars.
Right. And of course, there are many different ways to buy cars. You can buy from an individual. There are websites online. There's all sorts of ways. But this is a very common way to go to a dealership and buy a car there. And so before you go to that dealership, take the time to learn about the many new features available. And you can think of, do you want that GPS system? Do you want something else? Or, do you want just something simple? And here, Connie, we talk about the non-mechanical features. I think what they're getting at here is some of the technology involved in a car, which there's lots of that today. You have, as Andrea was talking about, those doors that open automatically. There's a lot of technology involved, but we don't always need that in a car, do we, Connie?
No. I mean, there's a lot of cool things out there. I mean, they have like seats that can give you massages now.
Yeah. I need that.
That would be distracting though.
Yeah,
I feel like you're in something's like moving your shoulders while you're driving is kind of dangerous. But they have some interesting ones. Like I read about this one that's like built-in night vision or something that like when you're driving at night can detect like the things on the side of the road that might be running into the road.
Yeah. And it can, when I was back in the States, I was driving my parents' car. It's not super fancy, but it does have a lot of tech things on it. Like it can, if you turn it on, it can detect if you're departing from the lane. It will make a sound and that sort of thing, which may be becoming more common. But, and also like, I like the fact that when it's colder, you can start the car inside and then the seats will start to warm up a bit. And those are nice little features if you live in a cooler climate. And so is that something is that on your must-have list, or you can maybe do it without that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Another tip I'd like to share is that before you go to a dealership, you have your narrowed down list, but you can also go to their website, because today a lot of dealerships have their entire inventory on a website, and then you can look at different makes and models and different features that they have. Oh, nice. So you're also going in with a better understanding of what that dealership has. It can be overwhelming to walk into a dealership and there's cars everywhere, and then you have to find out what each car's features are and such. So that's something that we did, and that was helpful. I'm not sure if dealerships in Taiwan do that, but it might be something to look into.
Yeah. You have to think about what it is, before you go to the dealership, and what you want and the features that you want. And we see here, while they can add a lot of value, they're not always necessary, those extra features. And so that's something to consider. And then the fun part, you get to test drive the car. Sometimes I walk by a dealership and I see these nice cars, Connie, and I just want to go in and test drive. I'm not interested in buying them, but it'd be fun to go. Maybe they would see that as soon as I walked in, that, this guy's not going to buy a car. But it would be fun to test drive them. But when you get to this point, you're really trying to, kick the tires, so to speak, which just means that you're, trying it out and looking a little closer at it. And this is kind of an exciting part of the car buying process. So you drive the car you're thinking about buying, and maybe it has all the features you want, but maybe it's uncomfortable, right? And so that's why you want to make sure that you test drive it. And You want to see how fast it can go or whatever, the pickup, right? And, some cars, you push the gas pedal and it feels like it takes it a while to kind of get going, right? You want to try all those things out.
Right. You want to make sure it's a good fit for you. If you're sitting there, you feel too low to the ground, you feel too high, you don't feel comfortable parking in this. So, the only way to really know is to drive it,
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are coming close to the end of our show today, so let's go to our last reading and we'll come back for discussion.
Find out what others are paying. Knowing how much others have paid for the car you want will make you a confident negotiator. To that end, don't be afraid to shop around with a few dealerships, then choose the one with the best deal. Get a car inspection. An inspection from your mechanic should include at least an overall visual inspection for rust and other body bugaboos, checking for worn suspension components and leaky seals, evaluating wear on belts, checking spark plug wires, inspecting brakes, giving the electrical system a visual once-over, checking the quality of the tires. I can't emphasize that last bullet point enough. The tires may look fine, but if they are more than 5 years old, the rubber components will have degraded, which could have deadly consequences.
How much should your potential new car cost? Figure that out. What are others paying for it? Maybe you can look that up online somewhere to figure out what the going rate is, and that will help you to be a better negotiator, right? If they're asking for way more, you can say, hey, I know that this isn't what it should cost. Not to say it in those words, but you kind of have an idea, right? And so you can shop around as well based upon that information. It's too expensive at this place, you can go to another place and try to negotiate with them, which is a big part of the car buying process. Now, we have just a little bit of time left. I want to take a look at some of the words in our last section here where it talks about getting a car inspection. First, Connie, we have this word here. It talks about you have a visual inspection for rust and other body bugaboos? What is that?
I haven't heard this word in a long time. It's a very infrequently used word. It just means anything that will surprise you, kind of jump out of you, that's maybe a problem.
All right. Absolutely. And then we have some car terminology here. We talk about suspension components and also spark plug wires. You can look at our specialized terms section for more on that. But I want to talk about this, Andrea, before we go, giving the electrical system a visual once-over.
So that's where you check it out, make sure it's working. You basically look at it, and I would also ask the dealer to turn it on and make sure everything's okay.
Very good point. And the last word I want to mention before we go here, it talks about the tires and how they, the rubber components will have degraded, right? And so if something something degrades, it is kind of spoiled or it's destroyed. Over time, things degrade, they wear out. And so we want to be careful, especially with tires, as we look at those, and we need to buy new ones and so forth. And so it's important to check the quality of the tires. Well, we're all out of time today. We'll review a bit tomorrow from what we learned today. Tomorrow we will talk about trendy tips to organize your closet. So join us tomorrow for day 2 of our lifestyle article. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.